Okay, testing. Can you guys hear me in the back? Yes? All right. Okay, so I first wanted to bring up a URL, codifieddesign.com/go/ETE. As promised in my agenda, there's a template. One of the templates I'm going to show you guys today, you can download this with all kinds of responsive web experiences, which I'll be talking about. There's also a second template you can get on adobe.com where we've actually put some templates up there. They're touted as Dreamweaver templates, but as you guys probably know, it's all HTML, so you guys can certainly pull those down and mess with those as well. Those templates also come with source Photoshop files with the slices intact, and I'm going to be talking about some of the web optimization capabilities inside Photoshop and how we use some of that for responsive design as well. And when you guys download the templates, you can change the art, take full credit for the templates. My therapist and I have really worked through that, so you guys can just go take full credit for all that stuff. And then here's all the places you guys can stalk me online as well. There's also a coupon for udemy.com if you or any of your people want to take my course on udemy.com. And lynda.com, I also have a URL up here that will give you a free 7-day trial to lynda.com. So you can watch as much lynda.com as you want. There are thousands of videos on every topic you can imagine. And so the activation starts the second you sign up. So wait till, end of day on a Friday, hit go, and then watch as much as you can for a whole week. Including watch all of mine. That was kind of a joke. You guys can laugh. Okay. Okay, very good. Okay, so I want to start by talking about just plain old responsive design. And so this has really been blowing up for the past year and a half. And the idea behind responsive design is we have a single HTML file, we have a single CSS file, and as we condense our browser down, we start changing the way the layout starts to work. And so this is the one template that you can get from the Adobe website. And so what this will start to do is when I start to drag my browser, one of the things you'll notice is that the design is completely liquid. And when I zoom up on different areas, we've even done things like change the photography in the sidebar. So notice how this photograph here is hinged on the right-hand side. So one of the things we have to start thinking about with responsive design is there's a bunch of different sort of stages or sizes of what the design can look like. So as I move this back and forth, notice we get this sort of cropping effect on the left side, and the photograph is hinged on the right-hand side. So one of the things we have to think about when we're designing this is, do we want to focus the photograph in the center, on the right, or on the left? By setting that orientation in CSS, as the site increases and decreases, we get this sort of dynamic cropping effect. The reason that I make a big deal about the cropping is, to designers, this is horrible. We spend agonizing time picking the exact crop that we want to have for a photograph. And then to have the web browser change the crop is horrible. So one of the things we start to think about, again, from a design standpoint, is how, if this was going to be live cropped, what's the most important part of that? And then I use CSS to align right, align left, or align center. So it's really important that this area here stay intact, and this other rider back here from this particular statue, it's okay if they condense the browser down and he starts to disappear. So that's one technique in here. The second one is when we switch to different states, so this is the sort of medium screen tablet state. When I get out to this width, this is the large screen state. We have, most of the time, 3 different states. We have our large computer state, our tablet or really wide HTC Android phone, or iPhones and other phones that have about a 300 or 400 pixel range. And so one of the things we do is we take the banner at the top and actually condense this down. So this is the large banner taking about 65 or 70 kilobytes as a JPEG file. Condense this down, this is a much smaller size. And the other thing we do is take the buttons that are across the top, we make them a little bit smaller and space them out. Part of the idea here is these buttons are probably needing to be tapped by a finger now instead of a mouse. We're much more precise with the mouse than we are with our fingers. So in the mouse state here, I can come over here and roll over these. Get to the medium state, we sort of stretch them out a little bit, again, just to make it a little easier for the users to tap them. When I come down under our 400 pixel threshold, what we do is we take the sidebar that was over on the side and drop it down underneath the content. We make the banner at the top much smaller, and we also take the navigation and we move the navigation now to be underneath the content. On a phone, if I were to go to a mobile website, tap on a link, and the first thing I saw were 3 or 4 buttons at the very top, our users will be tempted to hit those buttons again. When we use the interfaces of mobile devices, mobile phones, especially if you go into your settings or pick a Wi-Fi hotspot, Every time you see those buttons, you're tempted to keep clicking the buttons and keep moving in a horizontal sense. Since I want people to actually read this content, we need to put the navigation after. So this is sort of a technique, and this is a behavior that we've seen on mobile devices. You get to a page, you see the content, you flick through to get to the bottom, then once you've consumed all the content, click on the next link and then continue on. Now the shifting of that navigation from the bottom to the top is done completely again with CSS. So I want to talk about some of the techniques about how this particular template's built that are a little bit different from what we might normally see. The first technique, if we come in here and take a look at the HTML file, is that there are no image tags in this entire template. If I scroll through here, everything is an H1 tag, a P tag, a UL tag, or just plain old areas at the top. We have a header tag up here. We have figure tags down here. We have a fig caption, but there's no IMG tags, no images in this whatsoever. And then at the very bottom, we have a navigation class. And then at the very, very bottom, we have our footer class. So one thing we're doing is standardizing on HTML5. All of these tags, footer, nav, figure, fig caption, header, are all HTML5. And the second thing is we're not using any images in this particular piece. So the first thing that we're doing at the very top of the document is we're making use of a Google HTML5 shiv. And you can see this inside of here. And it's inside of a IE conditional statement, if less than IE 9, which means IE 6, 7, and 8. This will render pretty okay in IE 6. It will work completely in 7 and 8, again, even though we're using HTML5, because we're making use of this Google shiv. And then we also have a separate style sheet here that we're using specifically for IE 7 and 8 as well. So this style sheet down here will do a few things like turn specific items into display blocks and set Z indexes and all that stuff that's so awesome about IE, and set all that stuff here inside of that conditional statement. Second thing is we're using a meta tag up here to set the UX compatible to IE 9. And then the other thing we're doing up here is we're setting the viewport. We're setting the viewport width to an initial scale of 1.0. This way, when you hit this with a mobile phone, the mobile phone will not take this 1,000 pixel wide design and scale the viewport down so that you can pinch and double tap. We're actually taking that content, telling the device, the viewport, keep this at 1.0, span it out, and then the CSS3 media queries kick in, and we actually test how wide that viewport is, and then change all of the individual CSS rules. The final sort of technique we're doing inside of here, and I'll go into more detail on each of these, is in the stylesheet.css file, what we've done is we've actually taken all of the large screen CSS rules and left them out in the open as the sort of default state. So if you do hit this with IE 7 and 8, you're going to see a design that looks very much like what we were just looking at inside of our browser. You're going to see something that looks like this. There's been a lot of people in the mobile community over the past year that claim you should build a mobile size site first and build up from there. I love that idea in practice, but if I had a website that people looked at in IE 7 and 8 and all they saw was this small size, I would have a really hard time invoicing them and getting them to pay it. So I love the idea of start small with mobile and build it up. But when we start looking at a practical sense, what we've done in this template here is start with a design that looks like your traditional website, and then let the devices, which all support media queries, by the way, and let the devices then sort of adapt their design down. If you don't agree with that approach, when we take a look at the CSS, you can simply switch the small screen rules for the large screen rules and do the same technique where you start from small and grow up. So I want to take a quick look at what's happening inside of the CSS file here. So inside of this CSS file, when I start to scroll through here, what we see is all of the H1 tags, all of the content, the sidebar, and under the category here of layout, these are all of the rules that are outside of a media query. So they're just the rules that are just put right into the page. When we get further on down in our CSS, we start to see two breakouts. We have media queries, which start with screen, minimum width 150 and max 500, to find all of our small screens. And so what you'll see here is a redefinition of all of those CSS rules. The default ones come out first, and then if the device is between 150 and 500, all of the small screen devices begin to override the ones that were at the top. And again, to change the sort of strategy to take small and put it up there and put large inside of here is a quick cut and paste if you want to follow that approach. And then lastly, let's come down, and under the medium screen rules, there's not quite as many of these because on a lot of the tablet devices, the Zoom and the iPad, for example, we have a lot of resolution, so we're not seeing anything that different from what we have on our computer screens. And we just sort of start to redefine some of these individual pieces here. So that's what the CSS is doing. There's one little trick we have here that with CSS, we're taking that navigation that was across the top and moving it to be underneath the content. And that will move to underneath the content regardless of how much or little content is on that page. And so without using JavaScript, we need to be able to take all that navigation and shift it in the page. And so the way we do that is if we take a look at the HTML, and I scroll down into the HTML on the page, the navigation is the very last thing right before the footer. And so what we've done here is we've taken the navigation, simply defined them as anchor tags, and do all the styling with CSS. And what we do is we take the nav, and if we are on a computer screen or a tablet, we set an absolute position value. The outermost container of the design has an absolute position set, a position set of relative. Setting an absolute position of nav will then be relative to that item, goes all the way up to the top. We know the banner is at the top, and then we position computer screen and tablet for that particular spot. When somebody's on a small screen device, and we look at the small screen rules, we come down here, and under our position, for our nav item, we instead say, if the page nav is in the small screen rules, we set the position to inherit. So basically what that does is it undoes the position absolute for that nav item and lets it fall within its data structure in the HTML. In the HTML, that navigation falls right before the footer. So when you get to a small screen device, the navigation takes away its absolute position, drops it all the way down to the bottom of the page. So again, really kind of cool and neat. You don't have to do anything else with your file, and you'll know that your navigation will always be after all of your content on the page. Pretty cool? You can just nod a little bit. And, okay, good. Okay, so those are some of the techniques that are inside of here. The other thing I mentioned is we're not using any image tags. What not using image tags allows us to do is to actually switch the graphics depending on what screen size somebody's visiting this with. So if I have a 250 kilobyte file, my beautiful JPEG that looks great, it's our CEO, he's got to look awesome on the computer. When somebody visits us on a phone, if I use a CSS rule and simply scale that image, I'm still making my user download 250K of data on a tablet or a phone, but I'm only showing them a really small area of image. So without using JavaScript, I need to be able to switch out the graphic that's showing up inside of that image. So what we've done inside this template as well is used CSS to inject all of the images that we're using inside of our content. So quickly, I'll zoom up here on the page header under the medium screen. And so again, this is using the HTML5 header tag. If I scroll over here, notice we're defining a background image. I'm using banner medium.jpg, setting the padding, setting all the other properties. So the header tag is still holding the logo and has the absolute position set, so the navigation position's inside of it. But the actual fact we're seeing a graphic behind there is being controlled through CSS. This means when I scroll up and I see small screens, I can see small screen photo and small banner at the top. So here that is listed right here. And then in the computer screen, I can see the large screen. We're doing the same thing for the figure photos. Figure photo over here, background URL, sidebar photo small JPEG, align right. And again, that's giving me that container for that graphic. So when you download these assets, you're going to get a bunch of artwork inside of Photoshop. So I'm going to zoom up here inside of Photoshop. And what we've done inside of Photoshop here is set up a whole series of graphics. So when you download these templates, you'll get these graphics in here as well. In the Layers panel, over on the right-hand side, I'm going to turn on just a gray background layer so we can actually see the artwork. And so if I zoom up here, you can see all the different pieces of art we have. We have 3 different versions of our logo. Small screen with a different sort of orientation, medium screen, and large screen. And if I scroll up here, we can see the 3 different banner sizes. So this is the large banner, the medium banner, and the small banner. So inside of Photoshop, if you're new to Photoshop, you can go under the cropping tool, and if you hold down, there are 2 additional tools under the crop tool, a slicing tool and a slice selection tool. The idea behind slicing in Photoshop lets me draw an area on the canvas that Photoshop will then save as a separate image when I use the Save for Web and Devices module. This allows me to create one large canvas of artwork when I'm doing my design work, section out little pieces inside of Photoshop, and then save out these individual pieces. So if I come in here and let me come over to my slice selection tool, you can see inside of the file, when I turn this on, I have these little tiny blue indicators here telling me that these are slices. Any blue slice is one that I've drawn, and any gray slice is one that Photoshop has drawn. So Photoshop tries to complete out the canvas like a giant jigsaw puzzle. If I double click on one of these items, I come up to the Slice Options panel. This allows me to name my slice, give it an exact pixel dimension inside of the slice optimization area. And this is important because when I come up to the File menu and come down and choose Save for Web and Devices, this tells Photoshop that I want to save out web-optimized artwork, and I want it to pay attention to all of the slices I've put into my Photoshop file. So when I select this, I get this ginormous dialog box. This is only rivaled by the Vanishing Point dialog box, if any of you guys use Photoshop. I'm guessing this isn't the biggest Photoshop crowd, right? Okay, that's why I'm going to go kind of fast through here. But if you get a Photoshop file, it's all the cool things you can do. So what I can do is I can select one of these graphics. In the upper right-hand corner, I can pick what optimization setting I want. So I'm going to choose JPEG. I can pick a quality setting here. And as I come in here and change these properties, if I grab this and let's just drag this down to something terrible like 5, zoom up on this, and I can see what, oh, that's not projecting very well. Let's pick a light area. There we go. So, how AOL is that? So you can see a live representation of what that compression setting looks like. The reason I'm spending time in this is, in addition to Photoshop showing me how awful or great that could look, it gives me a live readout in the lower left-hand corner of how big that file size is going to be. So as I come in here and change my settings, I can see that that JPEG at that setting is going to be 5.56 kilobytes. And so what that means is that large file, that large JPEG is going to be really tiny, 5K. I probably want to make that a little bit bigger since that'll be our computer size. So let's come up to about 60. That's going to give me a 16 kilobyte size. Let me select the middle one now. I'm going to set the middle one down to a quality of 50%. Because all of the tablet devices have resolutions of 160 pixels per inch and higher, I'm going to get a really sharp image, and they're going to be a little bit smaller on the actual devices. So I can sort of fake it a little bit. So if somebody's on a tablet, I can go down to 50. It's going to look just as nice. And on the small screen device, especially if you have an iPhone or one of the HTCs that have over 200 and some, and the iPhone's like 3 something, that's going to look fantastic even at a quality of 30%, and that's going to give me a 3.8 kilobyte file size. So where I'm really going with this is, once I save out all of these individual graphics, when somebody hits my website and they're looking at that template on a small screen device, they're going to download a total of about 25 kilobytes of data on their phone. Same website, same HTML, same CSS on a computer screen is going to download 140 kilobytes of data. They're both going to look great, but they're going to be optimized for each of the individual users and the individual screens themselves. So again, having the HTML image containers and the CSS loading that data in is going to give me all of that capability. Similarly, with the sidebar photos, I was mentioning that a fate almost as bad as death would be to have somebody recropping our photographs, since we spent all that time. So one of the things we can start to do inside of Photoshop as well is create the individual slices that we want to have for what's more important for each one of these individual photographs. So I'll just zoom out here and we'll take a look at all 3 of these. Notice that when I get on smaller screens, I zoom up a little closer on the photography. Because, again, we're going to have a smaller screen, higher resolution. I really want to be able to see the horse and this one lead horseman. Medium screens, tablets, it's okay if I see this guy. I realize it's going to crop from the left. And on a computer screen, I just want to be able to see as much of that as I want. Computer screens have a little lower resolution than we have on our devices, so I know that on a computer screen I can see a little bit more of that photograph. And then I can go in and start to make some of these decisions. So another feature I'm using inside of Photoshop that you guys can lock onto, and that is if you look in the Layers panel over on the right-hand side, you'll see this little icon here. It's got a little document, and it's got a little dot here on the left. This is what Photoshop calls a smart object. And the idea behind a smart object is I can take any object in Photoshop and wrap it in a container that will allow me to scale this up and down and be able to manipulate the artwork. And every time I manipulate it, Photoshop will go back to the source piece of art and re-rasterize it. So I don't get that sort of JPEG-ing artifacting. So I'll show you that in a moment. But to get to that on this particular piece here, because let's say you guys want to swap out your own photo inside of this area, double click on any of the layers for the horseman. That's going to bring up the original JPEG file that's sort of encapsulated on the main stage of all of those individual pieces. So I'll just do something in here. I'll just do, let me turn off my adjustment layers and let me just do an inverse, right? Fancy town. I'm going to hit File, Save. And then notice when I save this source of the smart object, notice that all three of these items in the background now got updated. So if you have a new photograph you want to put in, copy, paste it into the smart object here, hit save, and all three of the ones in the background will be updated. So you can use this as a quick template to create multiple states of your individual graphics. And don't forget to charge extra for design services on your development invoice when you send that out. So let's close that. So to quickly show you how quickly you can start working with smart objects, this is one of the icons that we're using for the ETE iPhone app. You guys are all like tapping on this and visiting the sponsors, right? So without any kind of a smart object, let me say I want to transform the hands here. I'm going to just transform these down and I'm going to scale these down. When I hit return, Photoshop will re-rasterize that image to that particular size of the canvas. So now let's say I have a client who changes their mind and they want it to be a little bit bigger. I don't know about you guys, but our clients sometimes change their mind and we have to go back and do stuff again. So we say, okay, we want that big. Let me hit refresh. Now this starts to look really sort of ugly and gross because I scaled it all the way down. When Photoshop reinterpolates to the canvas, it throws away all that data. When I scale it back up, I need that data back. So it's all gone and I'm basically scaling up that small image. And the last thing I'm going to do in Photoshop is, if I want to create a smart object, and this will work in Photoshop CS3 and higher, I'm going to hold my Command or Control in Windows, select two layers. I'm selecting the large hands and the sponsor's text layer. I'm simply going to right click and I'm going to come up here and say, just convert this to a smart object. When I do that, both of those layers now get sort of condensed into that little piece. Now I can transform this. Let me scale this down really teeny tiny. Hit return. Let me transform it again. Let me scale it back up. And every time I scale it up and down, it's going to re-rasterize from the source. Double click on the smart object. That's going to bring me into the original artwork for the smart object. So any number of layers in Photoshop, you can condense these down. And these are the application sets that we're actually using for the iPhone here. So all of this artwork inside of here is showing me all of the individual slices. So let's say the folks at Cherry have a design change. I can quickly go in here and take the regular phone screen or the Retina scans. This is the sheet for the iPhone. And quickly change, scale, manipulate all of my content. So this is one of the ways that we start to really multiply our workflow in a design sense of managing all of the individual assets. And we have a sheet that looks just like this for the Android icons as well. Okay, so when you guys download the Photoshop files, play with them. Go in there, poke around, play with the smart objects. It really can be a lot of fun. Okay, pretty cool so far? So that template we were looking at, this one over here, this is pretty cool. It's nice, it scales, it stretches, it's really neat, it goes across all these things. It's a little boring. Nothing's actually moving, nothing's changing. This would be kind of a tough sell. This would be great for a WordPress blog. But if you're going to be marketing a product, people want animation, they want movement, they want all the things we can do with JavaScript. So what's the next sort of logical step to go from here? At this point, we've been talking about responsive web design. And so now I want to talk about responsive web experiences. How do we change the user experience using some of these same principles, but still have something that looks a lot more interesting and something that we can sell to our clients? So let's go and open a responsive design that does something a little different. Maybe we have an area at the top here, which is a marquee, that will automatically start to animate and cycle through a series of photography. And this is the template you guys can download from that URL again. This is the one that's going to be the most fun to play with. And so, so we took a couple pictures of Old City to say, hey, we're down here in Old City for ETE. And so we have this HTML piece over here that every time the piece cycles, this will move down, change the HTML, and slide it back up. If I didn't have my cursor inside. If you put your cursor inside, by the way, it auto stops the marquee. So now it'll count 5 or 6 seconds and then move around. So again, a lot of JavaScript in here, pulling out individual pictures, lining them up in a row, animating through the caption. These items down here are interactive as well, so I can come down and I can click on the third photo and move this. So now I'm going to take this and I'm going to start resizing this piece. So let's move this down. So between here and here, we've moved between the computer screen and the tablet. All I've really done is just sort of shift the navigation from being above the photo to below it because I'm going to run out of room with the logo. But notice that the size of the marquee is still working exactly the same. So what we decided to do here is, since, again, tablets have 768 up to 1024 resolution, which isn't that much smaller than our computer, we're using the same marquee for tablets and for computers. They have a lot more memory, and we can keep that same user experience. We've also made a slight change with the promos down here. We have the promos now showing up above the actual content that's promoting each one of these items. So from this side here, we have the photos, we have the headlines to the right. Move this down. We take the photos, put them above, and have the promos underneath here. There's 3 different divs in here, and each one of these images is being brought in through CSS. So again, there's no image tags being used in this entire piece. And then lastly, when I condense down all the way, what we do in this particular area is we take the promos, put them on the left, put all the text on the right-hand side, and notice the marquee has now been taken away. So what we've done here is we have a separate div container for the mobile devices where we take a smaller cropped image, style everything exactly the same, but we take away the animation, we take away the multi-images, we take away the JavaScript and the marquee, and we just have something that looks and feels branded like our company website, but doesn't have all of that extra JavaScript that's being initiated. And so to really see the benefits of what's happening here, let me open this up to the computer size. Let's come down and let's use some inspection tools and check and see what's happening with this particular project. So I'm going to come over to the network settings here. I'm going to reload our page. And when I come down here with my inspection tools, I can see that in its expanded form for tablets and computers, we have 18 requests being made to the server with a total of 583 kilobytes. This includes jQuery, includes all the custom JavaScript, the 3 big images, all of the things that are going on this page. All of that content is being loaded in because somebody has either a tablet or a computer-sized screen. I'm going to come down, let's move this down to the mobile version. Let's come over here, let's hit reload. Same website with all the same code. We have 14 requests and 122 kilobytes, so 1/5 the size to load this exact same experience on a phone that we would have for a tablet and a computer. So that gets incredibly powerful. We get all of the things that we want to have on our website with all the cool new bells and whistles, and still something that you're going to get on your handheld device that's going to be really small and tiny and is going to download really fast. So what is our technique for doing this? So we have a couple of things going on inside of here. The first thing I'm going to do is open up the HTML file up in our window here. So we're doing a lot of the same things we did in the other template, bringing in the Google Shiv. We're also bringing in a couple of JavaScript files inside of here, preload scripts, jQuery, bringing in our own custom template. This is where we're programming the marquee. There's a few things that happen inside of here that we just left for the global piece, declaring 2 variables here in JavaScript, time to change and transition time. So every 6 seconds we do a count on a listener event, and every 6 seconds, once that equals the total time to change, we just switch out the navigation and just run that in a circle. Then when we come down here, we have, again, a lot of the same pieces we had before. We have a header, we have a div, and inside of the marquee area, we have 2 blocks. So we have this first block up here, which is all of the HTML markup that we need to generate that carousel. We inject the photos inside of marquee photos. We take the marquee captions. We load those and inject those inside with that JavaScript. I'll show you in a minute. And then if you're on a tablet and computer, that whole top area is going to be loaded. If you're not, the only download hit you take is the couple of bytes for those lines of code. If we're on a small screen device, we instead come down here, load the small screen information, and pull the HTML from an AJAX load for just that small piece. So it's two containers that we have inside the page, and then we just basically live inject whichever one you need for what's happening inside of your page. So if we take a look at the JavaScript file in the template.js, we have a couple of pieces down here. We even have a debugger mode, so you can turn on debugging mode if you want and actually see the timers and everything sort of count up. We have our load marquee data, which is inside of the document ready for jQuery. So once everything's been loaded, we run this custom function. And then inside of the custom function, load marquee, we come in here and we take a look and we say, if the window width, right here, and again, we're using jQuery to query this, since jQuery is part of the framework that we're building this on. If it's greater than 550, we're going to do an AJAX load, and we're going to pull in marquee panel's HTML file, and we're going to, on a data callback, once it's there, we're going to take the marquee panel's data, we're going to set all that information, and then we're going to run our setup marquee function, which is going to actually inject all of the data that it finds from the HTML, put it into there, and start it running. However, if it is not greater than that, we're simply going to still do an AJAX load, but we're going to pull in a small screen panel instead. All that has in it is one small graphic and the HTML caption for that individual piece. The CSS is exactly the same in the small and medium screens, so when that loads up, the look looks exactly the same. Semi-transparency, font color, size, linking colors, all of that consistency is following through, even though one's a full marquee and one's just an individual static panel. And then down here, we actually set a window marquee mode to small screen. The other thing that we put in there, just to kind of show off the thing actually working, is we run a set interval here. And in addition to AutoVance, we're also checking the whole time to see if the marquee is actually opened up. You can decide to keep this or not. We have it in here just so that you can actually condense it on your computer screen and see the load change. Probably you'd want to have something where on the initial load, if somebody's on a phone, you just detect it once, give them the data, and you don't go checking all the time to see if it's actually bigger or smaller. It's totally up to you. It doesn't really hurt anything. We're testing every 1,000 ticks, so 1,000 milliseconds, so once every second we're checking and seeing if the viewport size has changed at all or not. And again, the other thing we're doing here that's a little different from the first template is, since there's a pretty fair amount of CSS that's creating this particular layout, we've actually divided the CSS into individual files. So we have a stylesheet.css, and this contains all of the CSS rules for the large screen device. And then in addition, we have small and medium. So this is a slightly different approach than what we did with the first one, where we put all of the CSS rules in the same file. And so where you'll see this is when we actually are loading this particular file, we will pick, this is me trying to talk and click. So what we do inside of here with the media queries is we have our media for only screen, 50 to 500 and 551 to 800, but these are set inside of media queries that point to individual files. So you don't have to have all of the media queries in one CSS file. You can have them in multiple files. Again, the reason we picked this was because each one of these CSS files is weighing in at about between 18 and 25 kilobytes. Not the end of the world, but I don't want to have 3 25 kilobyte files. That's 75K if I only need the base one and the small screen, for example. And so again, we left the large one in there just so that it's compatible with IE 7 and 8.
So when you
yes.
When you resize the window, it's going to actually like pull in a new style sheet?
When I resize the window, it'll pull in a new style sheet and reference that new style sheet as well.
Okay. So it's actually triggering like the browser to go get that new style sheet?
Yes. Yeah, the question is it triggering the browser to get that style sheet? Yes. The nature of media queries means that when you have that CSS media query that says if the screen viewport is a certain size, those rules will kick in, whether you're pointing to a separate file or have a series of CSS rules in that file. And so when the browser viewport is within that certain range, all of the other CSS rules are ignored and all the new ones come in to place. So it's not like they get compounded on each other. If you have medium rules and small rules and you move between the two, you move from medium to small, the medium ones go away completely. The small rules then become king of everything that's happening there, which gives us the ability to override the individual pieces that are happening. So as I open and close the viewport, I am changing on the fly all the references for all those different pieces, which again becomes incredibly powerful. Yes, question?
That rule is going to apply and it's going to get re-executed as the screen changes size as you're dragging around?
Yes.
And aren't those rules determining which additional HTTP requests you're making? So is a new request going to get made while I'm dragging? You showed 14 versus 18 requests in your two scenarios.
Yes.
Okay, so if I bring up the 14 and I refresh the screen, I would have 14 requests. I drag the screen. Additional HTTP requests are going to be made?
Yes.
As I'm doing
The additional HTTP request that will be made, if you set your CSS files like this, where I'm actually pointing to a file based on a media query, then that CSS will be kicked in. The main JavaScript file that I have, which is also running a set interval, when I go from small screen to large screen, the CSS, I get one HTTP request from that new large screen device. The JavaScript that's running a set interval checks the viewport and says, oh, you're wide enough. I'm going to also go grab all those images and all that other stuff. So there's actually 3 additional files in HTML and the CSS, which gives us the difference from 14 to 18.
Okay, so the additional HTTP requests are being triggered by the JavaScript, which is running on a set interval.
JavaScript's doing 3 of them. The CSS is doing 1 of them. So the CSS media query is pulling 1 additional request in.
Even after the original page load?
Even after the original page load, yes. I know, fancy town. Somebody else had a question? No? Yeah, fancy town. All right. How long can I blab for? It's like 1/4 of, right? Okay. Good so far? Any other questions on what we're doing so far? So this is mostly awesome. This is like, 75% of the way to awesome town. So the next thing we want to do is that mobile experience doesn't have any of the sort of coolness we can actually do with mobile frameworks. Right, with a mobile framework, we can do things like have JavaScript where if I tap Learn More, maybe we swipe side to side. We load a mobile framework, something like Sencha or jQuery Mobile. So the ultimate sort of user experience would be if I could take everything that we've done here, where I've incorporated this sort of Ajax live fancy thing up top. I have all my responsive design pieces at the bottom. But when I get down to a small screen device, I just ditch the framework altogether. So everything I've been doing to this point has been on the client side. Either CSS has just been natively supported in the browsers and switching out my media queries, or I've added JavaScript in here and loaded in additional frameworks and done some animation. But everything's been downloaded or have a listening event, listening for a change, and going to the server and getting something else. The server hasn't really done anything at this point. If we want to really start changing out what we can do, if we add in some server-side logic, we can start to dramatically change the way the mobile experience looks in addition to all of the other pieces that we were just looking at. So at this point, I want to go in and take a look at something that we put together for the Philadelphia Museum of Art. So inside of here, the Young Friends run a winter gala every year, and so every year they wanted to do something cooler than last year. So after this one, I don't know if we can actually do that. But I'll show you what's up here. So this is a sort of invitation website, and this is built using a jQuery plugin called Roundabout, which is a carousel plugin. It's one of my lynda.com courses, by the way, so you guys can watch that for free. A little bit, just a little nod. Wow, this guy's so quiet. It's after lunch. So the way the carousel works is I can come in here and I can tap on individual items and all the different pages just sort of carousel around. Right? It's kind of cool, kind of fun. It's responsive in nature, so I can grab the window and condense this down. So we have sort of 2 states. This is the tablet portrait view, which I'll show you on an iPad in a minute. And so this, again, does exactly the same thing, but notice that the panels are much taller. I can also come down here at the bottom, and I can click on like Raffle, for example, or About Us, and it'll just sort of quickly switch and flip around. And the way that this is built is very much like jQuery Mobile or Sencha mobile apps, where we have a whole series of divs in one page. We just pick out all the divs, absolutely position them, run it against the plugin, and it just sort of runs these in a circle. So pretty cool. You guys have seen lots of different frameworks like this. But what gets interesting here is there's also a listener event running on this the whole time. So if I take this and condense this down and get down to mobile size, what we do instead is throw away all of the frameworks and jQuery plugin and reload an entire new framework called jQuery Mobile for this particular example. So now all of that content is in the page, but it's now going to function like a typical jQuery Mobile site, where I can tap on these individual links and scroll back and forth, scroll up and down, and get exactly that same user experience I would have with a mobile device. So this is sort of that holy grail where I have all of the mobile capabilities on the mobile site and all of the sort of interactive and coolness on the larger versions of the site. So the way that this one is actually put together, so let me close all these first and just open those. I love being at a tech conference because it's the only conference that people like to see code. If I did this at the How Design conference, there'd be a door on the floor, it would just drop, and I would disappear. So let's come into the carousel. So this is probably more you guys' speed, right? PHP, includes, running all that stuff. So basically, there's a certain HTML construct that I need to have in order to get that carousel to work. So I could either, sort of write this out or maybe generate it from a database. But I just have all of these different individual files and data that come in, and this is the outermost structure for that framework. So what we've done here is completely separated the content from the structures that we needed in order to get all of this to work. So if I came into the individual pages, here's the About Us page, just plain old HTML. This is the exact same HTML that's loaded into the tablet version, into the computer version, and into the jQuery mobile version. So again, if this was pulling out of a database or a CMS, it'd be the same sort of idea. That'd be a node or a channel or whatever CMS you use, and pull out this individual data. But these loaders over here load it into specific orders. So the carousel loader needs this particular structure in order to work. Switch over to the mobile loader. This is the HTML structure that jQuery mobile needs. And again, I could switch this out with any framework that I need because I really just have to get the HTML structure in place so that those frameworks will pick up with the CSS and HTML and create that user experience. So in here, I'm doing the same thing. I'm running my includes. Maybe I have a little bit of additional data that jQuery mobile needs. The loader music, this is strictly so that you can hear the music on an iPad playing through QuickTime versus using Flash Player to play on all the other devices that have the Flash plugin. And then the print loader, this basically just has some CSS for the print version, including things like page breaks that every browser supports except that Microsoft one. And so we just basically dynamically construct the print version as well. So I have all of these different versions of this. So in addition to mobile, we also have print. And at the very bottom, we even have a QR code that we generate. So if somebody sees a printout, they can scan that QR code. They're back on the digital world and going. So again, so these, basically, that music one's not a good loader. So we have the three loaders, carousel, mobile, and the print, that take that same data and just sort of restructure that all together. Now the other sort of little extra thing that we do in that file, and there's a link to this in that URL I gave you guys, so you can, all of these files are in the clear, so you can do a view source and see all this stuff. I can't technically give it away. You can edit that out of the recording, by the way. But you guys can certainly do a view source and pull all that stuff out. Is in JavaScript, we go in, and if you're on the large screen device, we just do a quick JavaScript detect for, is this an iPad? And if it is an iPad, we're going to set that individual variable. And then we're going to check that later. So if I go visit this site on an iPad, let's say I rotate my device. So on an iPad widescreen, every 1 second you can see it sort of resets itself. If you tap your finger and hold, you can actually click and drag these panels back and forth. So you don't have to just tap the individual panels or the buttons. You can do a tap drag event, tap on the item, and swipe it back and forth on your iPad. Same framework, same plugin, extra features in the plugin that we just simply detect with JavaScript, check if you're on an iPad, and then activate these pieces as well. On this particular plugin, they don't have an Android version of the tap event, drag thing, whatever yet. They said they're coming out with it soon. But again, you don't have to do jQuery mobile, you don't have to do Roundabout, you can do any of these individual frameworks or things that you build yourself. The real key here is that we have that complete separation of whatever frameworks you're writing for the user experience on a computer and a tablet and a phone, and dynamically switching all of this stuff out at the last minute. So what we're doing here is, I mentioned we're doing a server-side detection. We're checking with PHP on the server to check the exact navigator that you're using. And if you're using a computer and we're checking specific versions of all of the different browsers, we're loading that data in, and then the PHP file, the script that we have on the server, decides which loader it's going to pull in. So the individual index file just looks like this. We have just a p tag with the loading. That's the index file. That's all that's there. As soon as that file gets hit, the server detects what the navigator agent is, decides if it's a mobile device, pulls the mobile loader PHP file, which then in turn goes out and it pulls all the individual includes that we have to construct that entire user experience. And then we have the listening event running on that as well. So as I take this and open this up and close it, we can see that we go from the jQuery mobile, I open this up, wait 1 Mississippi, and then it jumps back in, loads the other framework, ditches the jQuery mobile, and then I can tap on these items as well and open this up. So as I said, this is sort of the holy grail sort of approach to that. And of course, if you're working with the CMS, all of this sort of includes and stuff can be taken completely away with just passing one variable to your CMS and then loading a template, depending on how the CMS works, and just construct each of these user experiences based on that. Yes, question?
It looks like the jQuery mobile adds the hash for the page you're on. The other ones, does this larger one not respect that?
The larger one is not respecting the hash here at all. What we're doing on the plugin here is it's just detecting the item that you click event on and moves across. Okay. We probably should, when we switch back and forth, remove the hashtag off of the URL, running the URI. We could just take that off. That's a good catch. No, we didn't actually, and it won't do anything here. So if I reload on committee, it's not going to do anything here.
Right. And that would be a cooler way to go.
We probably should set it up so that if the committee's there, we should probably rotate to that panel. Next year, dude, I needed an idea for next year. The 2013 gala, it's going to have auto rotation for panels. So I know that was a ton of stuff, but I wanted you guys to see, starting from responsive design with just HTML, CSS, looking at adding in JavaScript, and then finally an example here where we're actually taking full frameworks and rearranging and changing the complete user experience. And again, the whole idea here is to code as little as possible, which I know you guys are always trying to do as well, and just get the most number of devices and the most number of places you can take that design and that coding work out so that you're not constantly designing for specific screens and sizes. A lot of designers have trouble with this, and this is really hitting the design community lately because in the design world, when we're in design school, we have 3 principles that we design with. We have size, shape, and color. And these are the 3 things that, as a designer, we can use to tell our story and give our relationships and communicate. And when we go into this, we totally lose shape. We still have relative size to each other, we still have color, but we're losing shape. So designers are losing 1/3 of all the things they're used to controlling. So that's why they'll kick and scream and cry like babies, including myself. But once designers start to sort of embrace this, there's a lot of things we can really do. And I would argue that the user experience on all of these examples follows really well in all the different sizes because we've really standardized on color, we've standardized on the branding, and really got that message to happen across all the different screen sizes. Yes, question?
You may have said it already, I might have just missed it, but when the page loads at full size and you resize it down to the mobile experience, has the jQuery mobile framework preloaded, or are you loading using a particular method to load that in only when the experience changes?
On this example here, I am only loading the jQuery mobile experience when it's needed. When you scale down to a different size, I'm basically pulling out that code and then re-injecting it again. So when I pull it out and then re-inject it and you're on a small size, I'll pull in jQuery mobile when we're pulling that in.
Just using JavaScript to...
Yes. Yeah, we're manipulating the DOM with JavaScript on that whole time. Which again is fun and cool. I wouldn't attempt that if the project's due in 3 hours because some of this was really kind of a pain to get a lot of it to work. But once it works, it's pretty fantastic to go in and start doing this. Yes, question?
Images could be important for search engine optimization, for alt text, or if you want to show up in image search. So if you're doing injecting images with CSS, is there a way to deal with that, or would you just put the image tag in SEO is important?
Oh, that's a good question. So the question is using image tags for SEO optimization or other reasons you would want to have an image tag in there for like alt text. So the reason that I chose to not put images in the 2 templates was I didn't want to have to inject any of those with JavaScript, let's say. So I just wanted to have my HTML be as small as possible and use my CSS to inject all that stuff. If you do want to have images in the page, you need to have them searched or alt text and all that kind of stuff. And you want to do the injection route, what I would say is I would then inject my images with JavaScript into the page after the document's been loaded. So Google will still see that because it'll be part of the document object model, but then you can go back in later and be able to inject that. So I could have like figure caption, for example, and maybe you do something like the mobile frameworks are doing where you put a figure tag and then you put a data, you say like data-image, and then inside you give it a value like small sidebar photo. Then after the page loads, you look for that data item and then you inject the image tag inside that container. So then you'll have the right images being injected inside of the page. That's the one approach you can do. What I'm really trying to do with these images not being in the page is I don't want to have one image that's being scaled for the individual pieces. I just want that data structure to be really small. The other approach you can do with what you're saying is if you want to do something on the server with PHP or ASP or any of the server-side languages, and you detect the navigator and the size of that device ahead of time, then you can inject the page just like you would normally. It wouldn't be responsive design, so if they open and close a browser, it doesn't change. But again, I would argue, not a lot of people out there besides designers and developers are resizing browsers to see how things are built. So you can actually have the server write all of the HTML data in the page based on that actual navigator, and sort of bypass the responsive design aspect, or at least the individual data aspect of that content, and then just use the responsive design for slight variations in different sizes. So. Yeah, if you want to code on the server, there's a lot more stuff you can do than once we're client side. Yes?
How does responsive design and these techniques impact development cost and also project time?
Oh, that's a great question. So how does this affect project cost and development time? So it's been our experience that creating design work that can be responsive later on has been adding anywhere from 35 to 45% to the project cost. So if we have a project that would take us 100 hours, it's taking us about 130, 140 hours to build that out. Now the argument we make to the clients is if we were to take your website and completely build it for 35 devices, or at least 3 individual sizes, you could be looking at 200, 250 hours. So we've been finding if we start off right out of the gate knowing that it's going to be a responsive design, and we start designing like a phone screen and a computer screen, and knowing ahead of time that we're going to do that, for just 20 or 30% more on the project, you can have something that's going to work across all of your individual devices.
Follow up on that is, how much more is it, if you're able to plan for it up front, clearly you can contain costs, but as we know, customers will come in at the last minute and say, oh, by the way, I hear responsive is where I want to be, can we add that? Are we looking at 50%, 60%?
Gotcha. So yeah, if you already have a site or you've already done the development, the client comes back and say they want to do this. If you've done a website that's CSS based in layout already, adding the responsive aspect to it is completely doable. There's a lot of CSS rules you'll need to override on that particular piece. So depending on the design complexity, I would take a shot in the dark and put it at like 60 to 70% of the same amount of time to make that responsive. Because what you're going to end up doing is you're going to go back and undo a lot of your CSS rules. And it's not the technology that's the hard part, because it's easy to just dupe a file, go in and make changes, set some CSS parameters, and switch out the CSS. What gets more difficult is, this is the hardest part, is when things get smaller on screens, what's the content that's more important? Because what will likely come up is they'll say, well, if I'm on a small screen, I really don't want this, this, and this, and they'll pick just arbitrary pieces in the site. Based on how that design and the content condenses down would change the way you might have built the original site if you knew all of those changes were going to come in. So in some cases you could either decide we're going to just rebuild this piece, or you might decide to go into the database and sort of tag content and say if it's responsive, we put certain CSS classes on things and they just hide as they go. But it'll be the way the design implements down and the content changes more than the technology.
So are you open now when you are in front of customers and you're putting together estimates? Are you saying, hey, let's plan for responsive now if you want it, or are you just still waiting for them to see you on it?
Oh no, we go up right away and show people this stuff. So these 2 templates, and this one too, this one's sort of a specialty site. This is really cool and sort of the holy grail of all 3 things. But that second design with the marquee is probably something that people would really purchase. We try to show people that stuff right away. And just advice from us, if you get a client who says they really want something to work on a tablet and a phone, and they don't have a tablet or phone that they can look at your website in, get them a tablet or a phone. Buy them an iPod Touch for $99. They'll love you, and they can start looking at your stuff on mobile. Because one of the things that people say is, we want it responsive, we want it touch, and if people don't know what it's like to touch a website, which sounds silly to everyone in this room, but people are afraid. They don't want to pinch or touch. They don't really quite know how it works. These are the people that can run you in circles saying, oh, I thought it would do this. I thought I could just pinch and swipe and zoom and drag. And, it's JavaScript. I mean, it's not, there are some limitations to it. So just make sure that the client can be at least savvy enough to understand what it is that you're actually selling or what they're actually trying to purchase from you. And so, go on site, show them some of these templates. There's lots of like WordPress responsive design templates as well, which might be really easy. Throw a WordPress site up on your, up on your site and throw a couple responsive designs in there as well, themes, and just switch between them. And just get the client used to seeing how these things work and what it's like to touch and see a website that's this big on their tiny little phones. We've had clients who have purchased mobile websites from us where we've got ready to flip the switch and realized that they've never actually seen it on a phone. They've only looked at it in Internet Explorer. And, it was shocking. So, we learned from that. That was about 2 years ago. And now we just make sure that they are actually seeing it. We ask them what kind of phones they have and all that kind of stuff and make sure that they know what it is they're purchasing. Because this stuff can get complicated. And as I was saying before, there's all these different sort of states. One of the things that's really interesting is, like, if I'm looking at this responsive design and I get the browser to about right here, we'll have creative directors and stuff say, wow, I totally don't like the sizing of that. I don't like the overall sizing of this piece here. I don't like the way the type is wrapping. And in reality, no one's probably looking at this site at that size, at that particular pixel. That's 1 pixel before it switches to the mobile state. So this idea of a completely fluid or responsive design, some people start getting really literal with that and start moving it and looking at every single state, because this design has 1,024 states, because you can go pixel by pixel on that browser and get it to completely condense down. So anyway, that was a long way of saying, talk with your clients and educate them and make sure they know what it is you're selling them, and explain to them what's good about this and what they're going to sacrifice. It's going to be different sizes across, and you're losing 1/3 of your design capabilities, but you're gaining all this other stuff, and then show them the things that they are gaining. Yes?
So you pointed out along the way a couple of places where you're making concessions to older browsers not having the media query capabilities and things like that.
Yes.
You've got traditional logic in there if it's IP9, et cetera. Can you comment on overall how portable all of this is and what tricks you had to do and which parts really were the hardest on different browsers, different size devices, et cetera?
Yeah. So the question is, what kind of tricks did we have to do for these templates to get that to work across browsers? So this design and the other one with the marquee, actually all 3 of these will work in IE 7 and 8 as well, which is really the bane of our existence. So the first one is all of these use HTML5. So we just jumped right on the HTML5 bandwagon using things like figure caption, heading, and navigation. And we've been using HTML5 for 1.5 years and haven't looked back. There's a couple different scripts that you can add into your files to make IE 7 and 8 understand HTML5. Because unfortunately, when you hit an HTML5 document with IE 7 or 8, they don't just show things a little differently. They show you a blank white page. Like, it just doesn't render at all. So there's 2 JavaScripts that I would recommend. One's called modernizer.js. The other one is the Google HTML5 shiv. The Google HTML5 shiv is a little bit smaller than the Modernizer. Modernizer has some CSS that goes along with it and can do a lot more stuff. My sort of view is I don't care much about IE 7 and 8. I just want it to render in some way, shape, or form. That makes me happy. There's so many other devices and browsers to worry about. I just want to make sure that it will just load. IE 9 has media query support inside of those as well, so that will be fine. And then the other piece is taking the large screen computer CSS rules and having those be loaded by default and then overriding with small and medium. A true responsive design purist would tell you to have a large, medium, and small CSS and only load one of them. What I'm proposing with these 2 templates here is load the large and then override it with small and medium. That way, if it's just large, IE 7 and 8, then they're going to see this. The Modernizer or HTML5 is going to render the tag so that it can see that. So it's going to see all the individual tags, apply the CSS, and you're going to get a page that works in IE 7 and 8. Once you don't have to worry about 7 and 8 anymore, IE 9 is just as capable as Safari and Chrome and Firefox. You're totally fine. So it's those 2, 7 and 8. And considering how long IE 6 hung around, we could be in for a really long wait. And so one of the things I did inside of this particular template here is I just did that conditional statement here that just checks if we're less than IE 9, I just load these 2 in. So all the other browsers will ignore it. It's 4 lines of code to make sure I'm compatible back to 7 and 8. It won't kill me. I've done worse things to get things to work in Explorer in my life, so. Yes?
So So other than 7 or 8, across all of the other browsers and across all of the mobile browsers and various phones and devices, it all pretty much just works?
Oh yeah. All the mobile device, Android and iOS run on WebKit, which is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me in my life. So we're really just worried about Firefox and IE7 and 8 on the platforms. And Firefox keeps really good pace with WebKit, so they're doing a really good job. So all of these things I'm showing you, it's just IE7 and 8 that's the real problem. And so with these two little sort of adjustments here in these templates, you'll get those two browsers and then just forge ahead with the higher end stuff we're doing.
So 7 and 8 always have the large format?
Yes. That's what I'm proposing. Yep. Some mobile purists will say IE7 and 8 should get the small screen view and then grow up from there.
Okay.
I would argue against that because I have a hard time selling that to my clients. If they're on 7 and 8, they want their website. So put the large screen first and then do small and medium after. But if you want to change that, just simply switch the rules. Put large inside the media query and put small as the default. And then you can do the mobile purist sort of approach. Pretty fancy. Okay, so that URL I'll bring up again so you guys can see it. And don't forget to say nice things about me on Twitter. And I'll hang around for a little more if you guys have more questions. So thank you for attending.